People in high school had always talked about this house out in the country that was abandoned and badly burned. The story was that there was a high schooler getting high and drunk upstairs years ago, and some other kids showed up and burned the building down, unsure if they knew he was inside or not, and if it was just for fun or if they were being malicious. Anyways, my brother, along with our friends Dylan and John, got into John's car and decided to check it out one night. Along the way, we picked up my girlfriend at the time up at her mom's house for the adventure. Remember this final detail, as it's important later. We finally got to the house after travelling down a gravel road for what felt like forever. At first, we just parked out front, taking it all in. It was pretty creepy and just didn't feel right. We eventually walked up the courage to go inside. We got out the car, turned on our flashlights and went in. It was all so quiet because we were so freaked out and no one said a word. Until Dylan jokingly yelped and we all jumped, then laughed, but then heard a thud. We all stopped and agreed that it sounded like it came from upstairs. My brother pounded a wall next to us once there was a response from above. A similar bang of the same intensity, almost an echo. We banged again and there was another in return, so we stopped and agreed we should probably leave. Then it got weird. As we left, we heard repetitive thuds from above, over and over and over again, scaring us out of the building. We ran to the car and sped away. You'd think it'd end here, under the guise of a homeless person, or another friend coaxed into hiding and scaring us, but it wasn't the case. We dropped my girlfriend back off at her house and drove the last 10 minutes to Dylan's grandma's place. She was out of town for the weekend, so we planned to game it out and mess around there before any of this was planned. We pulled into the driveway, got out of the car, and circled to examine it. We heard stories from others that there'd be handprints on their cars after they check. What we found was worse. The word "die" wiped into the car by someone's hand on the passenger side. As we found this, my girlfriend called my cell phone. Me, hello? Her, are you guys fucking with me? Hysterically? Me, what? What do you mean? We just got home. Her, the word "die" is on my mirror in the bathroom and it's all foggy. Me, what the fuck? No, we aren't fucking with you. Stay with your brother or mom, and I'll talk to you soon. Like I said, this was years ago, but I distinctly remember not telling her about our "die" message, as to not freak her out. Though it might be better if she thought her brother was fucking with her or something. Hindsight, maybe that wasn't the best idea, but I was panicked. At this point, we went into the house and agreed no one goes anywhere alone. And of course, right when we got into the house, John said he needed his phone from his car to tell his friends about this. We leaned on the whole "no one goes anywhere alone" thing, and I agreed to go back outside with him. Right before we got to the car, there were 4 clicks and each door locked. We sprinted back inside to find Dylan complaining of his arm burning before we could even tell them what happened. He ran it under the sink as we thought maybe he brushed it up against something poisonous by the house. He went to dry his arm with a towel, and when he pulled it off, dye was also scraped into his arm. After this, things started to calm down. We played games and tried to ignore it all. I can't remember how I calmed my girlfriend after all this, but I think she went to stay at a friend's house for the night and was convinced her brother messed with her. This happened to me about 6 months ago when I was visiting Colorado with my family. For context, myself and my boyfriend had booked night tour tickets to the Stanley, and I was thrilled. For clarification, I'm something of a hopeful skeptic, and my boyfriend is more on the side of disbelief entirely. I would just go ahead and call him a skeptic, but this conviction goes far beyond the ramifications of the world. In this context to my belief, I think he thinks the whole idea of ghosts and the paranormal is fun, but it just doesn't seem realistic to him, and he outright refuses to put any belief in the idea. I was genuinely excited for the whole thing. Me, being the little ghoul I am, had already done research into the whole history of the building, and was mainly just excited to be there and see what the tour had to offer. My boyfriend, the trooper he is, was just along for the ride. The tour guide allegedly warned us before we began that due to the high altitude, we may feel faint or pass out. And if we felt we were going to, it was okay to step out or take a moment, and that the tour would circle back around. Important note, I suffer from heart palpitations, and they have been intense enough in the past that I had to fight to stay conscious. I have almost passed out before due to them, but the cause wouldn't be something such as altitude. And even if that did happen, I had deigned to decline the prospect of missing any of the tour at the beginning. In all seriousness, I was going to stay on the tour even if I had severe palpitations. Let's cut to the chase, and I will say this while leaving out as much as possible, so it's an entirely blank slate experience for any who might wish to attend. It was time to enter Lucy's room. There was no light whatsoever in this room, except for a red light, which was the only light, in the hallway which spilled into the entryway of the room, but did absolutely nothing in the way of revealing the interior. My boyfriend was actually a little jumpy and hot-footed it since he was a little wary of entering. I remember pushing him out of the way. Not literally, I just got in front of him and saying, "Don't be scared," and entering. Why would I say this, you might ask? I wanted to be known. I was genuinely excited to be there. I was genuinely excited at the prospect of seeing something I couldn't explain and having a reason to believe. There was an ounce of fear in me, of course, but I couldn't imagine any time being wasted due to fear. I was far too elated at the entire situation and the prospects it held. We entered, and I put myself in the corner so I still had a view of the door and the people coming in. From the moment I entered, I began to see little white shapes dance across my vision. No biggie. I had seen similar shapes in dark rooms as a child. Nothing new there. Something to do with my eyes adjusting to the light, no doubt. However, just under a minute of me being in this corner, I noticed as I was watching people file into the room, I started seeing their after images follow behind them. Not anything like a little blur that covered the next people coming in to make that effect. I kept seeing the same person enter over and over again, like a haze. And it was happening for everyone. For instance, guy number 1 is super buff and short. After he entered the room, I would see the exact same shape follow close behind. Girl number 2, who's super tall and lanky, would enter for the first time, and I would see her shape follow close behind and enter the room over and over again, and it wouldn't stop. I think there's a term for this experience, actually. And in those stories, the visual effect follows the person. These kept going. I started to think my eyes were playing tricks on me due to the light, and I wiped my eyes to get rid of it. Nope, kept happening. I began to feel light, like I was floating and light as a feather. I could no longer feel the floor beneath me, or anything for that matter. And don't imagine it as being lifted. It was suddenly like all sense just disappeared except sight. Nothing around me. Like I was there, but I wasn't. And even that doesn't describe it. It almost felt like I was being held off the ground in suspension, but there was no weight pulling me down. I felt like I weighed nothing at all. And I remember envisioning a feather in the center of my chest. I felt what can only be described as my head falling backwards and my eyes closing, but I could see perfectly and there was no concept of shape. I remember being able to trust that I wasn't actually falling due to the fact that I was leaned against the wall behind me before the whole thing occurred, which kept me grounded. I remember having to fight to regain control over my body again. And when I looked up, the hazes were still happening. Same guy number one entering the room over and over again. Same girl number one entering the room over and over again. I remember feeling a sense of danger and knowing I needed to leave. So I said, I need to go, and waited to see if the hazes cleared. They didn't, but the hazes seemed to move out of the way instead. I remembered gunning it for the door and hoping I didn't hit anybody. The hallway was distorted, like looking through a fisheye lens. The walls were tall and round, and the floor was thin and long, and the red light was intense. I ran back to the stairs I initially came down and noticed the carpet was distorted as well. No colour changes, but certain areas of the pattern were bulged and round, and other parts were thin and spindly. I ran up the stairs as best as I could, and my vision began to blank. When I remember this part now, I distinctly remember it in frames. Like I remember being by one chair when I came up the stairs, and being much farther away and closer to the doors next. Not like a fluid memory. It played normally in your head. And the moment I got out of those doors, it was normal again. It took a few seconds to clear up, but almost instantly after, I was fine again. Completely fine. Now, as I said, I have almost passed out before on multiple occasions. And for me, there's a warning and a sense of dread. There's panic, and I know it's coming ahead of time. And now, due to a more recent event, I have almost passed out due to low blood sugar. So I still haven't experienced anything like this. As well, in the moment, I felt like I was falling back. I felt no fear, only confusion and peace. I wondered what was happening, but I wasn't terrified and panicking in the moment like I have been since. I have never experienced anything visual like this either. Not since or before. In fact, nothing I experienced in this story I have experienced before or after, which is why this experience excited me. The moment everything cleared away after I got outside as well, I remember being super angry with myself for not sticking through it and seeing what happened, because I got exactly what I wanted. A super cool experience with no explanation from my end. I heard later on from another person on the tour that she thought I was an actor, which was fun. And the buff guy was a real guy. He told me later on his wife had to stop him from running too. As well, I understand this sounds super made up and crazy, even though I have fun telling friends and family this story. It definitely comes across as a short fiction on paper, but I promise, for what it's worth, this actually happened. And this is actually one of the best stories I'll ever have, most likely. This is super long, sorry for that, but I hope some believers enjoyed it and got super excited, as I did. For a bit of context, this happened years ago, back when I worked at my local theatre. Being locally owned, it wasn't, and still isn't, nearly as big as your big corporation theatres like AMC, but it still had 10 different screens, mostly with stadium-style seating, but some with recliners as well. It's pretty well maintained and updated too. It's not old or dingy feeling at all. I've never seen super gung-ho on believing the paranormal, but I've never straight up denied it either. Most of my family is the same way, but my mom is pretty into that kind of thing. Also noteworthy, my older sister had worked at the same theatre a few years before me. At the point I encountered the ghost, I had only been working there a few months. I'm not a night person, so up until this point, I hadn't ever worked a closing shift. I know, stereotypical spooky night shift kind of stuff, but it just so happened to work out like that. Either way, it was probably around 11:30 p.m, and Theatre 6, being at the back of the main hallway, had just let out its final showing for the night. My manager asked if I could go clean it well and take out the trash, so it was good to go in the morning. Of course, that was my job, so I did. I walked into the theatre with my broom and dustpan and started sweeping up loose popcorn, straw papers, the usual. I work up the first few rows of seats, nothing unusual, and then as I hit the third or fourth row, I see a black figure of what looked like a man watching me from the top right section of the theatre. At first, I thought maybe I was so absorbed staring under the seats for trash that I somehow didn't notice that someone hadn't left the theatre yet. But as soon as I looked up, there was nothing there but empty seats. I was a little weirded out, but chalked it up to me being a bit tired from working a bit later than I'm used to, and kept going. Soon after, I reached the first two rows of premium seats, being the recliners. We had to wash those off with a wet rag, so they're a bit more time consuming to clean. As I'm bent over, one of these recliners scrubbing some gunk off it, I once more see a black figure, but this time it is much closer and walks directly behind me. Just then, I feel a tap on my shoulder, like somebody is trying to get my attention. Once again, I reasoned that maybe my manager walked in and needs something. So I turn around and audibly ask if they need something, only to once again be met with an empty room behind me. Now I'm starting to think something weird is up, and I didn't like it. Now that fear has set in, I can't stop feeling chills go down my spine like crazy, and I'm always scanning the room for activity. I'm pretty much running down the rows of seats, and only stopping if I see a very obvious mess. I do the exact same thing with the second row of recliners at the top of the theatre, almost entirely foregoing washing them down. As I finish cleaning in the top row, I once again see the figure behind me, since I am standing only about 2 rows directly above where I saw it the first time. It wasn't a particularly threatening figure in retrospect. The worst it ever did was tap on my shoulder, but it was late and I was tired. I didn't have the time nor energy to deal with a needy ghost. As such, I bucket down the left set of stairs, grabbed the trash can, and ran out of the theatre. I said nothing about this to any of my co-workers or managers, mostly because I didn't want to sound crazy. However, after going home, I told my mom about the situation, and being paranormally intrigued, for a lack of a better term, she was quite into the story, and then told me, "I think your sister said that one of the theatres is haunted before. You'll have to tell her this." At this time, my sister was home from college, so I went and told her the story, at which point she looks at me with a clearly surprised expression and asks me, "You mean none of the managers ever told you the story of how Theatre 6 is haunted?" At which point I told her, obviously not. I nearly just shat myself cleaning up that theatre, thinking I was losing my mind. So, to wrap up, after talking to the oldest of my managers, she informed me that an old man died of a heart attack in Theatre 6 while watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre many moons before, and apparently his name was Tom. It just so happens that workers find that the trash can in that theatre loves to fall over randomly, even while they are present in the theatre, and it seems like I'm the lucky employee who had the pleasure of actually meeting Tom. It took some courage to go into that theatre alone again after that incident, but I actually started to enjoy it after a while, and I would always try and ask Tom how his day was, if he liked seeing the same movie 30 times over, and that kind of thing, in the hopes that maybe I would meet him again. whether it would be a good thing or not, I never did. About 3 months ago, I started a new job. What I do isn't important or relevant. I started noticing things going on in the women's bathroom pretty much immediately. If you dig on my profile, you'll see I'm non-binary. I use the women's because I'm out at work. Not important, but I figured I'd clear the air about it now. Anyway, the women's restroom has 3 stalls side by side, with a handicapped stall taking up the entire back wall. Altogether, they make sort of an L shape. The 3rd stall, right next to the handicap stall, is where all the activity is. At least twice a week, I will walk past that stall to take luxury poos in the handicap stall. I like to live a little. And see someone standing in the stall, facing the wall, not moving, with the door open. They're always wearing a black and white sweater. No florals exactly, but not just abstract blobs either. They have shoulder-length, very shiny black hair. I've never gotten close look at what bottoms they're wearing, but they're a dark colour. The first dozen times I thought, what a weird way to stand in the stall, and tried to look at the shoes once I had sat down, only to see nothing. No shoes, no shadow, nothing. Did they manage to leave the stall in the few seconds it took me to get there? How did they do that silently on a tile floor? They didn't even flush or wash their hands or open the door to leave. Sometimes I'll walk in and hear noises as though someone is shaking the toilet paper dispenser in that stall. As soon as I get to it, silence and nothing to be seen. That toilet also flushes by itself sometimes, which is a feat since it isn't motion sensed. The custodian often complains about how there's always dust and toilet paper on the floor in that stall, but she can't find a source for the dust. The ceiling tiles above are in good shape and there's no holes in the wall. I have no idea the history of this building, and most of the people have been there less than 3 years and joke about the problem stall, having been a problem since they got there. A typical skeptic as I am, I hesitate to outright say there's a ghost, but I really can't explain everything that goes on in that stall. This morning at around 4:30 a.m, I stepped out my front door and I could see in front of me some shimmering in the sky. My street looks out over to a big hill with woods on it, and above it I could see maybe 5 small, faint white lights fading in and out, some standing still and some whizzing about like a meteor shower. This morning we had heavy rain, which stopped just before I left, so there were heavy low clouds, and these were definitely below the cloud line. They were like stars, but almost like they were half opaque. I watched them for a good 10 minutes or so before I had to leave. They looked like stars, but as I said, they were definitely below the cloud line and moved independently of each other. Twice there were bursts which moved like those sparky, spinning fireworks. Those fireworks that make a whistling noise, but with a weird, dim, faint light. Oh, also, they were concentrated to one spot, which rules out a meteor shower, which was my initial thought. I didn't have my phone on me, but I suspect they would have been bright enough to be picked up in the conditions. Interested to hear what people make of this one. I don't have any explanations, but it was certainly unusual, and I thought this board would maybe find it interesting. So I will start this off with a very brief explanation of who I am and what my life is about. I grew up psychic in a very haunted house. However, it wasn't until about age 18 that I started to realize that it was not the house that was haunted, but me. I have had lots of experiences with friends and family who really didn't believe in spirits, but I would somehow expand the frequency and they would see and feel the things when I was around. This is one of those experiences. This happened back when I was 18, several years ago. I had just graduated high school, was hanging out with my high school boyfriend in our small country town. The usual bored teenager stuff there is to do on a weekend. He was driving us around town, trying to figure out what there was to do that night. Finding ourselves driving up to an early 1800s graveyard with some beautiful gravestones. It was about 8 p.m. and nobody was there. Myself, always having loved graveyards and seeing the beautiful artwork on the stones, agreed that we could walk around for a bit. My boyfriend held the flashlight and we walked around, looking to find the oldest gravestone. Many had dates around 1800 to 1820, so it was fascinating to see my town's history literally right there. We had been walking around the graveyard, respectfully minding the stones and uprighting some fallen plants, when I felt almost magnetically drawn to a gravestone about 20 feet away. I made a beeline towards it, and right as I stepped in front of the stone, two things happened. My boyfriend turned and shined the light directly at me. He screamed and said, "Holy shit, what was that? We need to get out of here now." Sprinted to me, grabbed my wrist, and half ran, half stumbled to his car. Myself, the whole time, questioning what on earth what had just happened, because I had witnessed absolutely nothing, and my boyfriend was the type to be not afraid of anything. I always felt like he could have a standoff with a lion and never flinch. We got in his car and we peeled out as quickly as possible. My boyfriend positively shaking and sweating, panting, and continuously glancing at me and struggling to grasp for words. About 15 minutes later, we got to my house, and when we stopped in the driveway, it took a further few minutes for him to calm down and stop shaking. When he got himself together, he said, "I felt like there was something really strange going on right before you walked over to that grave. Like I knew that you could hear something that I couldn't, and I don't even believe in this stuff. So I saw you walk over to that grave, and right as you stopped and looked at it, I saw the fully black figure of a man appear 10 feet away, and then it sprinted right at you, and then it ran into your body. And as it ran into you, you disappeared. And right when I screamed, you were there again." And after that day, he began experiencing the paranormal and spirits, literally just like that. It was both the weirdest and most unexplained thing I have ever experienced, and also confusing for that to be the first spiritual encounter for someone to have. And yet, he's a very stable, incredibly logical and science-oriented person. But it was the experience that changed his life and brought him to the spiritual path. I have been known in the past to sort of be a portal for spirits. I've experienced this many times in ceremonies of various kinds, and also the work I have done of crossing over spirits that needed to move on. But never before had I witnessed my energy do this before. I have many, many experiences through my life that I can explain away perfectly in terms of spirits, knowing exactly what has happened. But this is one of very few experiences where I don't have an answer to why that happened in that way. So that's just one of hundreds of experiences that I've witnessed, or rather been a part of, for people around me. One evening, my mum was sitting on her bed when the brightest white lights surrounded her, swirling around and beaming bright lights. It was like a column around her, she says. She told me about this, and she was quite uneasy. Anyway, about 3 days later, myself and my boyfriend were sat in the living room, and my mum was sat in the middle of the stairs. out of the sight from us, but we could see the bottom of the stairs through the open living room door. It was daylight, but we seen the doorway light up and flicker the brightest light, like a strobe light but brighter. I shouted out and my mum ran down the stairs and said, "Please tell me you saw that." She said she had the brightest balls of light darting from her again. And although we never saw the balls of light as she was out of sight, we saw the light effect it had created. To add to this, there was no other explanation any of us can think of. There are no windows in our doorway, there's no light halfway up the stairs. It would never create so much light, even if it was. At the time, I was young and so afraid my mum got an electrician out to try and get some sort of explanation, and he was stumped. It could have been car lights, as at night her curtains were shut, and at other times we witnessed it was daylight. I've had some weird occurrences in my life, and just want to know if anyone has seen or heard of the same. I called them house ghouls, but I don't know what they're actually called. Some say they are the reasons for arguments and disruptions inside the home, and can be brought in by messing with certain doors you can't close. They lurk inside your homes undetected by the naked eye. They live inside the cracks of walls and your home, mainly crawl spaces, attics, or basements. Not sure if they are supernatural beings or not, but I once encountered it. Me and the neighbour's house was maybe 80 or 100 feet away. When I lived in South Jersey, near Vineland, the neighbours aren't what you would call quiet neighbours. They had the county police out there a couple times, mainly domestic calls for their adult son from within the home. He may have autism or some other type of learning or developmental disability, because he would lash out in anger sometimes in the household. It was just the father and the mother with their son residing there. One night, the ambulance and police came out to the house, and they brought the son out of the home on a stretcher, screaming pennies or something. It looked like visible blood, but I really couldn't see anything due to the glare of the police lights and EMS strobes lighting up the area. His mother was also taken to medical, and his father stayed at home. A day or two later, no one was at home, and it looks like they moved out. Seems like they just up and left. We're in a small town, so I would think somebody would have seen somebody leave. I was able to cure my intense curiosity because a buddy of mine went to high school with was an EMT that night at the house, and I was able to catch him at the local bar. Sitting at the bar, I go up and ask, "Oscar, what the hell happened that night?" He calmly looks at me with a humph and grin and then responds, "Crazy shit." He told me that he, son, snapped, took a paring knife, stabbed his mother in the neck, then went after the old man. He, the father, was able to shove his son inside a closet and lock the door until the police arrived. While inside the closet, the son then started a bellowing scream, almost like a howl. When police opened the door, he had took the paring knife and stabbed all inside his navel and gouged his right eye out. He screamed penance the whole way out of the home and all the way to the hospital. I then said, "Wow, do you think he just snapped?" My friend said, "Nah, it's definitely the house." I then choked it off. The exact same night later on, I saw what looked like people at the home. There was discarded furniture at the end of the lawn for trash, couches, tables, chairs, and other things I assume was clothes inside of black trash bags. It's not uncommon for people to search through trash or furniture though. So as I was going to look away, I noticed these things were like little elderly people, hunched over, very skinny bodies and protruding round bellies. Seems like they're balding with just very thinning strands of cotton-like hair, illuminated by the dimming garage light. I go out to take a further look, and I see two of them rummaging about the trash. One of them then goes around the side of the home, no more than 4'4", tall, stocky build, and skin was like a pale, sweaty hide. Arms were short at the shoulder and long at the elbows. also walked with a hobble and disgustingly snorted in air as it walked. The other was a bit taller, maybe around 5'11", short arms, long fingers, and long skinny legs, but walked hunched over. If stood straight up, it would maybe be about 7'1". Both have very deep eye sockets, you can barely see any eyes. In total disbelief of what I'm seeing, I had to wake my wife up and show her. She then goes and makes salt water and said an African Orishas prayer, opened the door, poured the water on our doorstep and porch, and closed it. We then watched the things try to get back inside the empty home, and they were gone. I then find out a lady lived there way before I was born, and she charged people to do seance. She was a medium. Needless to say, I don't live around there anymore. This was a while ago now, 2015-ish, and I still have PTSD from that time. I was sitting at the table eating dinner around 6 p.m. and had a funny feeling that something was behind me, so I turned around and saw what seemed to be like a mix of light and fog float past the couch in my living room. It was definitely shaped like a human, but I was quick to shake it off, thinking that I'm just seeing things because I didn't want to scare myself, lol. So I turned back around to eat, and I see my sister that's sitting opposite the couch where I'd just seen the apparition, making a funny face. She looks at me and says, "Did you see that?" And that's when I realized to myself, oh shit, I've just seen a ghost. I quickly go outside to try and debunk the situation, whether or not it could be a car coming up the driveway, but there was nothing. The house I was living in at the time had a really long driveway with multiple residents, so I was hoping it might have been one of them, but nope. Pretty much after we had seen that, the energy in the house changed and things started getting really weird. Like for one, I was left home alone one night with my old man went for work for the night shift. So I would go around the house and close all the doors and make sure they can't open. So I know that if one is open, I know for sure it wasn't the wind or something like that. And I would always make sure the front door was unlocked. Well, I get a call from my old man telling me to unlock the door, and I say to him, it is. And he's saying to me, nope, it's pretty locked because I'm outside. I walk towards the door in disbelief, thinking, I swear I left it unlocked. I'm so sure of it. And as I got to the door, I noticed the door to the garage was wide open, which was pretty much next to the front door. And the damn door was locked as well. From that night onwards, I was traumatized for what seemed like an eternity. I could no longer sleep without white noise in the background. I would have the fan on while playing a podcast of our local radio station. I lived like that for a few years. I'm not anywhere near as bad as I was now since I've moved, but now and again I play their podcast to help me sleep. Never want to experience something like that ever again. I was skeptical about ghosts till that happened. Hauntings carried on for a few months until the house was blessed by a minister. My partner and I moved into our house earlier this year. It's our first home together and we're absolutely delighted. Around a month in, I began hearing noises. Nothing too much. Little things like hearing movement in the kitchen when I was in the lounge or hearing footsteps upstairs. Things I could put down to the house settling or maybe sounds from the next door neighbour. These noises continued and I never mentioned anything to my partner until one night we were watching TV. When out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone in a bright red jumper walk from the cupboard under the stairs into the kitchen. I went in to check if we had an intruder, to find no one there, and the back door was locked. My partner double-checked around the house to no avail, and we put this down to me being tired. My partner is a skeptic. A month after that, my partner and I were watching a YouTube video on the TV and decided we wanted to go and look in the loft to find some DVDs. We both went upstairs after pausing the video, And when we came back down, the YouTube video was no longer on the screen, and someone had searched hello in the search bar. Nobody else was in the house. The doors and windows were locked, and it was connected to my partner's YouTube account that is only signed in on the TV, and his phone, which was also downstairs. After that, my partner had told me that he had also been seeing things out of the corner of his eye and hearing noises, but didn't want to tell me as he thought he was making it up. Whatever the explanation, it's been a bit unnerving, to say the least.